Hi, my name is Professor Cruz Medina, and today I'm going to be talking about multimodal composing. When we talk about multimodal composing, what we're basically discussing are the multiple modes of communication, which include the visual, the aural, which tends to think about both sound in terms of things like music or even narration, and gestural, thinking about, of course, body movement and how we move our hands as we're speaking. And then things like spatial, which has a lot to do with arrangement, how we think of laying things out in both images as well as on a page. And then, of course, our linguistic, which speaks to any written or spoken text here too. You can read more about that in Writer Designer. And something important to keep in mind is that all of these multimodal composing we tend to do in partnership, and they're interconnected with the different ways that we compose. So oftentimes when we're using the visual, we're also connecting with the gestural as we're also doing something, as well as the linguistic as we're using that gestural as well. And a lot of things we want to keep in mind is that a lot of this continues to parallel the traditional writing process. So where we might normally think of having some kind of outline and then coming up with our first draft of things, seeking feedback from somebody before we go back to our revising and changing things around, ultimately hoping to end with our publication here of our piece. A lot of these processes are still paralleled in the multimodal composing, oftentimes incorporating a lot of these changes of images and things like that. And editing can actually highlight to what extent we actually should be revising and rethinking and re-envisioning how we're doing our writing. So the thing is, a lot of these kinds of projects we've been working on already. Oftentimes all of us have done some kind of PowerPoint presentation where we're thinking about our gestural, our visual, our aural, as well as what linguistically we're saying. And then at the same time, if we've had any experience with websites and laying things out visually, laying things out spatially, keeping these considerations in mind. And then when we do projects like podcasts, we're thinking very much about the aural and linguistic. And then, of course, here in this video kind of situation, we're very much thinking about a lot of these coming together. One of the great points that these authors over here point out is that when these kinds of projects are particularly effective, they have something of an immersive quality where we feel like there's an experiential element which makes them much more effective. At the same time, some folks have argued that they not only have to think about these kinds of projects, which tend to be very digital, but that digital and multimodal, they don't actually have to be the same thing. Jody Shipka argues that in addition to thinking about all these different kinds of senses, that you could actually think of issues such as taste or even smell coming into a multimodal composition as well. And I think one of the main arguments for that she makes herself is that there is this added level of creativity when we're doing these kinds of projects, which I think makes them that much more engaging. And Jason Palmieri argues that a lot of this creativity can be extremely helpful in our early invention stages, or even as we're doing our revision process. Bringing in these kinds of projects can really help us reimagine and re-see these kinds of projects. And Palmieri also points out that we've been doing this kind of analysis or use of sound and visuals since the 1960s. So a lot of this isn't as new or as frightening as we sometimes think. And I think one of the major arguments that we want to consider these kinds of projects is, of course, wanting to prepare students for these 20th century or 21st century skills that are going to be expected in the job place. And I think Kathleen Blake Yancey was really informative in making this argument as early as the 2000s. So, as daunting as some of these projects might seem, it's important to keep in mind that we've been doing these kinds of projects for a long time and we're often very much familiar with a lot of the stages that we're doing it, and it also continues to parallel and advance our knowledge of how writing works. Thanks for watching.